She was only 15 when a man she'd never met walked up to her in a quiet suburban neighborhood, calm, polite, and hiding a gun under a towel. In seconds, he forced her into his car, bound her, and transported her to his apartment, where he locked her inside a plastic storage bin. But while he believed she was terrified and powerless, she was silently memorizing everything: the route he drove, the items in his home, the sounds through the walls, even the serial number on the handcuffs. Within 18 hours, she wouldn't just escape. She would give investigators the information they needed to identify a suspect later connected to multiple unsolved crimes across state lines. How does a teenager outthink a predator who had eluded police for years? Welcome back to MindWeb Crime Stories, where every case we cover is built only from publicly available reports, law enforcement statements, and verified government records. Today's story is one of the most extraordinary survivor accounts ever documented. The teen who outsmarted a serial killer and exposed his crimes. It begins with a 15-year-old girl from Columbia, South Carolina, someone described by friends, teachers, and neighbors as calm, observant, and remarkably responsible for her age. She wasn't the type to take risks, she wasn't rebellious. She was the kind of teenager who followed rules, helped her parents, and spent most of her time between school, church activities, and close friends. But on a summer morning in 2002, while helping a friend with simple chores in a quiet residential neighborhood, she crossed paths with a man investigators later identified as Richard Marc Evonitz, a man already linked to crimes stretching from South Carolina to Virginia. What happened next would not only test her strength, it would unravel years of unanswered questions for law enforcement. She was a responsible, straight-A teenager growing up in Columbia, South Carolina, known for her composure, her attention to detail, and a maturity that stood out even among adults. Friends said she was the kind of person who noticed things others overlooked. Teachers described her as disciplined, steady, and focused. At home, she was dependable, someone who followed routines, helped when needed, and rarely made decisions without thinking them through. On June 24, 2002, she wasn't doing anything risky or unusual. She was simply helping a friend's mother with basic chores in a quiet residential neighborhood, the kind of place where children played outside and families left their doors unlocked. It was broad daylight, the street was calm, nothing felt dangerous. But that ordinary summer morning brought her face to face with Richard Marc Evonitz, a man with a criminal record that included exposing himself to minors and a history investigators would later connect to multiple unsolved abductions and murders in Virginia. What made this case so shocking wasn't only the abduction itself. It was the way this teenager held on to her instincts, stayed alert, and used every moment of her captivity to gather information. By the time she escaped, she hadn't just saved herself. She had armed investigators with the exact details they needed to unravel a predator's multi-state trail of crimes. The encounter began when Evonitz pulled his beige Pontiac Firebird into the driveway where she was working. According to public reports, he approached her calmly, speaking in a controlled, almost polite tone. Then he lifted the corner of a towel in his hand, revealing a gun. In seconds, he forced her into a large plastic storage bin in the trunk of his car and shut the lid. As he drove away, she forced herself to stay alert. She paid attention to every turn, every stop, and the changes in road texture beneath the car. She counted seconds between traffic lights, listened for train tracks, and memorized the engine sound. These details would matter later. When the car finally stopped, she was carried into his apartment. An apartment investigators later said showed signs of planning: thick carpeting, heavy curtains, and furniture arranged to minimize noise. Inside, he restrained her using handcuffs, rope, and bindings. But while he believed she was terrified beyond thought, she was studying everything she could see. She memorized the serial number etched into the handcuffs. She noted the brands of magazines on his table: military, law enforcement, and true crime publications. She saw family photos on the refrigerator, giving clues about his relatives. She noticed a palm tree-themed shower curtain and the exact model of the vacuum cleaner he used while pacing the room. She listened to the air conditioner clicking on and off, marking time in her head. She stayed calm, cooperative, quiet. All of it was a strategy to survive. When Evonitz finally fell asleep, exhausted and confident he had complete control, she saw her chance. Using flexibility she had learned years earlier and escape techniques she had seen demonstrated on television, she worked one hand free from the restraints. Then she freed the other, eased herself off the bed without making a sound, and slowly unlocked the apartment door. Barefoot and carrying nothing but her memory, she bolted down the stairs and into the parking lot of the apartment complex. 2 residents saw her running and immediately called 911. Deputies from the Richland County Sheriff's Department arrived within minutes. They listened as she calmly recited details, street directions, floor layouts, vehicle description, identifying items inside the apartment. Detectives realized her description matched a man wanted for questioning in multiple unsolved abductions and murders in Spotsylvania County, Virginia, including the highly publicized cases of sisters Katty and Kristen Lisk and 16-year-old Sophia Silva. Police rushed to Evonitz's apartment, but by then, he was already fleeing the state. As investigators combed through Evonitz's Columbia apartment, the truth began to surface, slowly at first, then in a wave of horrifying clarity. Detectives recovered boxes filled with meticulously kept items, handwritten notes, personal belongings, and materials that matched details from several unsolved cases in Spotsylvania County, Virginia. Public records later confirmed that some of these items were linked to the long mysterious disappearances of Sophia Silva in 1996 and sisters Katty and Kristen Lisk in 1997. It became clear that this teenager hadn't just escaped a kidnapper. She had uncovered a serial predator who had evaded investigators for years. Days later, U.S. Marshals tracked Evonitz to Florida. When officers attempted a traffic stop, he sped away, triggering a high-speed pursuit across multiple counties. Cornered in Sarasota and refusing to surrender, he took his own life before law enforcement could apprehend him. Forensic evidence, fingerprints, fiber examinations, and DNA comparisons later confirmed investigators' worst fears. Evonitz was responsible for the murders of Sophia Silva and the Lisk sisters, 3 cases that had traumatized Virginia and remained unsolved for more than half a decade. The teen's escape had finally exposed the man behind those crimes. There would be no courtroom testimony, no jury, no verdict. Evonitz ended his own life before officers could place him in handcuffs, but what he left behind, inside his apartment, his vehicle, and his personal files, was more than enough for investigators to close the cases that had haunted Virginia for years. Using only verified public records, law enforcement statements, and forensic reports, authorities confirmed that the items recovered in his home matched evidence from the murders of Sophia Silva and sisters Katty and Kristen Lisk. The survivor's precise recollection of his apartment layout, his vehicle, and the identifying details she memorized allowed detectives to connect him with confidence to those unsolved crimes. For the families who'd waited years for answers, the confirmation didn't bring justice in a courtroom, but it finally brought the truth. Investigators later acknowledged publicly that without her remarkable memory and her ability to stay calm under extreme pressure, Richard Marc Evonitz might never have been identified. Her information tied together years of fragmented leads from Virginia and South Carolina. Clues that had never fully connected until she escaped and spoke to deputies in detail. Her courage didn't just save her own life. It closed one of the most troubling multi-state investigations of the early 2000s, finally giving families long-awaited answers about the murders of Sophia Silva and the Lisk sisters. Today, according to public interviews and official statements, she is recognized as the teenager whose bravery exposed a predator law enforcement had been chasing for years. bringing a measure of justice to victims who could no longer speak for themselves. If you think this case was unbelievable, wait until you hear about the survivor who escaped a kidnapper by diving from a moving car, an escape that helped investigators uncover an entire network of hidden crimes across state lines. That story is right here, if you're ready. If this episode moved you, remember to like, subscribe, and tap the notification bell so you never miss an investigation built only from verified public and government sources. Join us next week as we uncover another true crime case, just as shocking, complex, and unforgettable. Thank you for watching MindWeb Crime Stories.